Sup internet, Raggedy Adams here.
If comic books were like film studios.
I should probably explain that this is entirely fictional and hypothetical and off the top of my own head, and there are probably very little actual real-world similarities between films and comic books, but for the sake of the argument, it gets the point across. Number 4, independent companies. So we're past the major players now. Now we're into the kind of realm of the independent companies. The ones that aren't massive, but are still out there. Two of the bigger ones are IDW and Dynamite. Now whilst IDW has done some original content in the past, like 30 Days of Night by Steve Niles and Ben Templesmith, both them and Dynamite Entertainment tend to work with properties that already exist. Like if you see any comics that are based on Ghostbusters, or The Evil Dead, or Xena, chances are they're owned by either IDW or Dynamite. So in many ways, IDW and Dynamite are kind of like Arrow or Shout Factory. They're basically responsible for the stuff that people are still fond of from like their childhood and things, but aren't owned by a major company. Then you have people like Avatar Press, who mostly deal with like horror comics, but they're usually very kind of dark and gritty and often very sexually explicit. And they're probably the most like, if you wanted to go with a film studio, Lionsgate, who do the Saw movies. Or if you want to go with a company that produces mostly DVDs, someone like Anchor Bay in America, or what used to be Tartan in this country. Companies that both deal with a lot of foreign imports and with a lot of low-budget horror. The main reason being that even though Avatar has this reputation for producing stuff that is basically like snuff comics and full of just like blood and gore and tits and squick, they also tend to attract a lot of really good writers like Alan Moore and Warren Ellis and Garth Ennis and David Lapham, because they don't put a lot of the same editorial restrictions on them that they would face under a satellite of DC or Marvel like Vertigo or Icon. Then you get a lot of them that have basically kind of popped up since the .com explosion in the early 2000s, like Valiant or Boom Studios. They're kind of like Amazon and Netflix and those kind of companies. They're kind of on the upswing and they've got some interesting ideas, but they don't have the brand recognition of a DC or a Marvel or even a Dark Horse. At least not yet. I still have high hopes for Boom Studios. And as for Archie Comics, they're basically kind of similar to the companies that produced Twilight or The Hunger Games, or basically most kind of young adult kind of books. In Hollywood, you tend to get studios that do what they know, so you tend to find that a lot of the projects that are based on young adult books or skewed towards a young adult kind of demographic generally tend to be made by the same 3 or 4 different producers. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I'm just saying that's generally the business practice. And finally, number 5, distributors. Now hopefully one of the things you'll have picked up on earlier is I mentioned the fact that both Marvel and DC own the means of production. They have the offices where the writers and artists work, they have publishing heads, they have printing presses, kind of like a newspaper, right? Well, no. The difference between the way a comic and a newspaper is distributed is that different newspapers that are owned by different companies will distribute their own papers to the people who sell them. Most comic book companies don't own the means of distribution. The main company that is responsible for distributing comics in the Western Hemisphere is Diamond Distributors. They basically take Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image, and the majority of the major comic book companies' comics and send them off to all the various different comic shops in the world that they cover. Which would be fine if all comic book shops were big chains the way Forbidden Planet actually is in the UK. But the fact is the majority of them aren't. A lot of them are small businesses ran by a handful of dedicated staff. And essentially you're in a situation where the entirety of distribution is run by one company. The closest I can kind of describe it to is the way cinema chains work. Try to imagine, if you will, a situation where there are all the normal amount of film studios like Warner Brothers and Disney and Paramount and Universal and all them, but there is only one distribution chain. There is only one chain of cinemas in the entire country. Say, for the sake of argument, Odeon in the UK and AMC in America. Nothing against either of them, but let's just say they're the only examples. Now, the risk that you would have there, and the reason that there's so many different chains of cinemas at any given time, is that if you give all of that power to one chain, the big players will always get shown because they're able to produce stuff at a higher rate and able to buy influence, and the smaller companies get muscled out. Because that's never happened in the history of Hollywood, ever. Of course, we don't have that in cinema because the very nature of it is so populist. People of all different persuasions go to the cinema. It's something that most of us have in common. And because so many of us do that, people expect variety and value for money. And if they don't get it with company A, they will go to company B. And whilst this does lead to volatility in the industry, lots of companies do go under, there is always someone to fill the void. If Diamond Distributors went bust tomorrow, the entire distribution chain for comics in the Western Hemisphere would collapse. No one would know what to do. That's why it's so important to support small press and to support alternate means of getting comics, like through online means. And I'm not just talking about fucking digital distribution crap on fucking DC, New 52, and Marvel Now thing. I'm talking about people from real companies that make real comics. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the comic book industry is like the film industry. If you want me to do a vlog or a rant on a particular subject, I'm happy to oblige. Leave suggestions in the comments below. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And in the meantime, Raggedy Adams out. Hello? Hey, babe. I'm kind of recording at the moment. I'm sorry. I'm still recording. I'm still doing it. I'm sorry. It's taking a little longer than I planned. I'm getting there. I'm nearly there, though. Jojo says hi. Do you mind? Do you mind if I give you a ping when I'm done? Yeah, sure. Okay. Bye. I love you. Bye.